things are better left unknown. And I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. Oh, what a sinner, is it in her? What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner, is it in her? Is this real? Just illusion? I'm lost in a wonderland of confusion. I'm lost in a wonderland of confusion. Is this real or just illusion? Manifestation or a dark delusion? Is this real or just illusion? I'm lost in a wonderland of confusion.
Ripon Rabbit Hole is a community-driven radio. At times the community comments may reveal prejudices and other beliefs that we or our sponsors do not condone. Views or opinions expressed by the community, callers, or guests, are those of the individual speaking and do not represent the views or opinions of this site. Ripon Common Sense content is intended for mature audiences only. Enjoy.
Hello. Hello. This is My Life DIY, and
hi, this is JoJo.
Hi, my name is Ash.
Hey everybody, it's AJ the Ripon Rabbit.
This is Cynthia Sue Larson.
This is your man Meta, aka Propagate This Light.
And you're now listening
to Dark Wolf's Den.
The Dark Wolf's Den Show on Ripon Common Sense Radio.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
Are ghosts real?
We had 1,000 hours of continuous communication with the spirit world.
Does time travel actually exist?
The laws of physics seem to be compatible with time machines.
You know, sometimes I wonder about reincarnation, don't you?
A 4-year-old boy in Adelaide, Australia, has told his parents that he used to be Britain's Princess Diana.
What would happen if the world found out that aliens were real?
I didn't say disclosure would be easy, but what is the alternative?
To establish a Space Force as the 6th branch of the armed forces.
We have so many questions and yet so little time, so to have you here, the pleasure is all mine.
Coming to you from a secret mountain cave, hidden deep within the Idaho wilderness. This is the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and we are broadcasting live worldwide from a secret mountain cave hidden high up in the beautifully snow-covered peaks of the Idaho mountains. That's right. We're ripping through the electromagnetic soup, tearing through the atmosphere, and tunneling away into your radio like a quantum particle. This is the Dark Wolf's Den Show for Thursday, February 18th, 2021. So whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the movie Fire in the Sky. More specifically, we're going to hear from the person that was actually involved in the story. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, Travis Walton's case is what we're going to present tonight. One of the two most well-documented UFO abduction cases in the history of ufology. We're going to hear a lot about Travis tonight and what actually happened in those events. We'll get to all that more here in just a moment, but first, today in history. On this day in 1885, Mark Twain publishes The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn in the United States. What a true classic piece of American literature. That was on this day in 1885, and that is today's Today in History. A truly classic piece of Americana literature, right? And speaking of classic literature, in the ufology field, there is some very classic literature like the Betty and Barney Hill UFO abduction case. The most, if not one of the most famous abduction cases of all time. And there were two cases that were covered very heavily as far as detail and doctors' reports, police reports, things like that. The second case, of course, being the Travis Walton case. And this was definitely one for the record books. If you've ever seen the movie Fire in the Sky, it was closely based on this case. This is a real UFO abduction case, and it has yet to be debunked by absolutely anybody. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and pleasure to present to you Mr. Travis Walton.
First of all, you know, if you've seen the movie and know enough about the story, you know that there's been quite a bit of departure. You know, Hollywood always does that. I've never seen a movie about anything where I knew the background story, that it wasn't altered for dramatic purposes. And you know, that's just comes with the territory. It's not a documentary, it's a dramatization. So
do keep in mind when watching the movie Fire in the Sky, it is based on a true story, but it is a dramatization, and it does have some Hollywooding up in it. And he's going to touch on a couple of those things tonight that got Hollywooded up just a little bit more than they should have.
Some of the changes were forgivable, and others were not. So there it was in the high country of Arizona, largest ponderosa pine forest in the world, just about as high as you can get in that whole area. There were 7 of us. In the movie, it depicted 5. That's just to simplify the cast, you know, fewer characters for people to keep track of. There were actually 7 of us. And, you know, I had 2 brothers that were rolled into one character named Dan. Don and Dwayne became Dan, and they were like 4 or 5 different lawmen and investigators that were rolled into James Garner's character.
So next time you watch the movie, keep that in mind. These characters, some of these characters in the movie are just approximation of multiple characters that were actually involved in the case.
November 5th, 1975, the 7 of us working, putting in some long days, you know, in anticipation of winter weather shutting us out of the woods. We wanted to get the contract done. And so it was getting dark. We loaded up our equipment. We're headed out of there. In the movie, it looks like we'd been driving for some time and everybody was sleepy or drowsy, but actually we were all in a very alert state of mind, recently doing hard physical labor.
Keep that in mind. These guys weren't just falling asleep or, half asleep and just dazing off or dreaming. No. These guys were wide awake, just got off the job site, still got the adrenaline pumping.
That's how 7 of us fit in one vehicle, a crew cab truck. We're driving up this rough road, and it was on the low side left side of the ridge, headed south up towards the rim road. We caught sight of these little glimmers of light coming through the trees ahead. Right off, it was something that was out of the ordinary. It caught our attention, but it wasn't alarming at first. It was just, as we looked, it just wasn't adding up with any possible explanations. It was deer hunting season. I thought maybe deer hunters were camped there. We had encountered trees that had been hit by lightning before and stopped and put them out. And that's where the term fire in the sky, because we were thinking that maybe that had happened again.
So the term fire in the sky, the whole name of the movie, didn't have nothing to do with the encounter he was about to have. It was what they had thought actually had happened. A fire had been started from a lightning strike from the sky, fire in the sky, right? So it actually is interesting that it got that name for the movie when it has nothing to do with any actual UFO abduction. The name doesn't.
The Ponderosa Pine Forest right through there, has the highest number of lightning strikes of any place in the United States other than the Everglades. So we're thinking, maybe the moon, but then we look over here and see the moon in a different direction. But you could tell that the light was coming from higher than where ground level would be.
And I like how they have done their best to try to explain it away every logical way possible until there's no other logical answer left.
It was very thick tree growth, but all these little glimmers coming through there. So we were thinking maybe a forest fire.
Which, as he mentioned, with the amount of lightning strikes they get in that area, forest fires are very common. And I can tell you, living out here in the West, they're very common in a multitude of places. So, once again, a logical explanation, right?
I could see that there was a break in the trees up ahead and where the light was coming across the road. And I said, Mike, hurry up, get up there where we can see where it is. As soon as we got up there, boom, there it was. It was unmistakable. This craft was hovering less than between here and the outer door. I mean, it was unmistakable.
And remember, Travis isn't the only one who's seeing this. Everybody in the vehicle, all of his workmates, his brothers, everybody, are seeing this in real time.
The skeptic said, well, they just saw the planet Jupiter, This was not some hazy ball of light in the distance. I mean, it was just, Mike and John, they said, They were so impressed by the grandeur of this thing that they compared it to, they said it was terrifying and beautiful at the same time.
That sounds like a little bit more than just a ball of light in the sky. Something described as terrifying and beautiful at the same time, and was impressed by the grandeur of the vehicle. Yeah, I don't think this is just a ball of light in the distance that they see. It sounds like they see a little bit more than that.
But that was later. We weren't pausing to reflect. I mean, as soon as I saw it, I thought it would just take off and gone in a flash. So I said, Mike, stop the truck. And as soon as he hit the brake, I just threw open the door and jumped out and headed towards it, thinking I'd get a closer look as it zipped away.
And I've always said, if I ever see a UFO in that type of situation, I'd be the first to run up and, hey, let's go. Come on, I want to go with you, And you think I'm joking. I'm not. I would volunteer to go on an alien spaceship and if they want to trade information for information, that's fine. You want to do some tests, you give me knowledge, I'll give you knowledge. How's that? You know what I mean? But like Travis, I'm a curious type. I would have gotten out and went up and tried to figure out what this thing was. Would you get out of the vehicle and go up and if there was a UFO clearly right in front of you, would you be curious enough to do that? Or would you turn around and run the other way? I personally would jump in and run for the chance to see a UFO live. I'd be the first one pounding on the door if they landed.
As soon as we saw it, Alan Dallas yelled out, "It's a flying saucer." As I got out of the truck, I was already having misgivings about what I was doing, This was a very risky thing, but it was kind of the way I was at the time.
I want you to keep in mind that he said he was already having misgivings. Even though he did it, he was still kind of leery about his decision.
I was hearing these guys get more and more agitated the closer I got, and I was getting more and more scared, so I slowed down as I approached it. Now, Alan later said that he thought it looked to him like I was in some kind of a trance, like I was being drawn towards it. And Steve is saying that he thinks I was under their control and they were making me do it. And I didn't feel that way. I felt, like this was my own impulse, my own curiosity. And so, but they argue that, if they were in mind control, that they could make you think it was your own idea too. But, I remember the thought processes, about the danger and everything, and the sound it was making was really...
So I don't think it was mind control being used in this particular situation. And let's just put ourselves there for just a minute. If you were, just driving, you just pulled up and you jumped out and you're looking at this thing, mouth wide open in the sky, moving slowly towards it, I could see how that would look like you were being controlled. But if you look at it from the person's point of view, like if it was me, in my mind, it would be more of a awe moment, more of a wow than a mind control, right? It's just stunned at what's in front of you, more so than being under anyone's control or being told or made to do anything. Your reactions are merely because you're just wowed by the situation unfolding, right? That's how I would be. I would probably slowly kind of almost zombie-like walk up, just watching the thing, seeing what's going to happen. That's more of a human instinct of protection, I'd say, than a control, but that's my opinion.
Powerful. It was kind of an intimidating feeling. My heart was really pounding, and I got more and more scared the more agitated they were saying, get back in the truck, let's get out of here. They later said that it seemed like something was about to happen.
Now, keeping in mind the discussions we've been having here lately on the show, and especially last night's discussion about precognitive abilities and just the fact that we do sense things moments before they occur. And if you've ever been around an event or right before an event occurs, or it could be a small event like something somebody's about to say or a move they're about to make, or just little things like that. If you've ever been in a situation like that, you can kind of tell what's about to happen, and you have that sensation, right? I think that goes back to what we're about to hear here, is they could sense something was building, something was about to happen. Nobody knew what, but they could all sense that something was in the air, it was about to go off, something was about to happen.
And I don't think that's just from the circumstances of me getting too close to this thing. I think part of that was that there was this sensation, sort of subconscious, that was making the hair stand up, that it was some kind of an electrical charge building up.
He even said it himself, a subconscious sensation, like the mind was picking up on something that was about to happen before anything in reality had even been triggered to happen.
But when I got up closer, I was standing there looking up at it at an angle, and it was just, parts of it were glowing and parts of it were metallic, but it was like glass over the whole surface, real smooth. And even though it was giving off light, it was reflecting the trees and the surroundings. But it wasn't so bright that you couldn't see it clearly, In the movie, they made it look red, but it wasn't red at all. It was kind of a soft golden color. We compared it to like metal coming out of a blast furnace, but that's like white hot, you know, to where it's a very light golden color. So they made it look like lava in the movie, but it didn't. But
so another small detail of the movie that got Hollywooded up just a little bit, just something to keep in mind when you watch the movie.
When I was standing there looking up at it, and those guys were screaming at me and swearing at me to get away from there, suddenly it got louder and it started to move, and it wasn't real steady. It was sort of a little bit jerky as it moved away from me.
And we've seen this in other ufology cases where in lower orbit, closer to the Earth, and in slower situations, it is a little jerky movement of the craft until it actually gets upper in the atmosphere and more speed and momentum behind it. But its original movements usually are jerky, and I think that has something to do with the gravitational field that surrounds the craft itself. That's all speculation.
And that startled me. So I jumped for cover, and the nearest cover was that much closer to it. I went down and into a crouch there. And they were, you know, really in a frenzy at that point, the rest of the crew. Get the hell out of there, you know. I didn't need to be told. I was already feeling, I was really got myself in a tight one. So
now he's crouched behind this log, even closer to the craft that's above him that started to wobble just a little bit. That's now making this really funny sound, and sounds like or feels like in the air an electrical charge building up.
I decided to run back to the truck, and I jumped up to sprint back, and as soon as I straightened up, bam, that's when it hit me. This blast of energy come out of the craft.
Now, once again, I want you to remember all of his workmates and his brothers are watching on while this is happening.
And, you know, at the time, I thought that, you know, in the days afterwards, I thought that something had been fired. Maybe I'd accidentally triggered some automatic defense or something of that nature, or that they actually thought I was some kind of a threat. You wouldn't think a man on foot on the ground would present any threat. But now I think that what happened was when I stood up, I closed the distance, and that there was a charge built up in this thing that jumped to ground through my body.
Which, that theory there actually bears a lot of sense with me. Like, that kind of resonates with me. An accidental abduction, right? The equipment was charge built up, but didn't actually mean to be used, but standing up accidentally triggered that whatever the mechanism was that grounded out using Travis as the grounding effect. So an accidental abduction may have occurred, right? That's speculation. I don't know if it's accidental or not. That is all my speculation, but just from what it sounds like, you know, it makes a lot of sense to me.
That is really, you know, this is the key point to the whole episode, that, you know, interpreting what happened and what their agenda is and why I was kept for 5 days all has to do with the power of this energy. In the movie, surprisingly, Hollywood played it down. It was depicted as much less violent than it actually was.
And another piece to keep in mind if you're ever watching the movie Fire in the Sky.
They said it was like I'd stepped on a landmine, like a grenade throwing me through the air. Steve said it threw me 20 feet. John said my body hit the ground like a sack of meat, you know, that it was no attempt to defend myself or protect my fall, that I just landed crumpled up, so limp that they immediately were screaming at each other, "It killed him, he's dead, he's dead."
Could you imagine watching this UFO and then this zap comes out and your buddy just gets flung across the air and just lands flat, and you think he's dead at this point? I don't even know what I would do. These guys freaked out, but I don't even know what I would do.
So to the people that criticize them and say that they were cowardly to take off at that point, I got to tell them that, you know, Mike's responsibility to the rest of the crew was to get them to safety, and there was no sense in them putting everyone's life at risk to save somebody they thought was already dead. They were certain of it. And so they took off. They said they stopped up the road as soon as they were far enough away to see that it wasn't chasing them. And then they spotted some deer hunters going down the road, and they went to try to catch them, thinking they'd get some rifles to go back. Because even at that point, they were already realizing that they were going to have to see if they could save my life. And so they were unable to catch the deer hunters. Now, in the movie, when Mike says, we got to go back, and the guys started arguing that they didn't want to go back, Mike made the offer. Anybody who doesn't want to go back can just wait here for us, and we'll pick you up on our way back. But in real life, nobody volunteered to get out and wait alone in the dark. Everybody stayed in the truck. In the movie, Mike went back alone. I don't know why they did that.
So yet another piece to keep in mind when watching the movie. He didn't go back alone. Everybody stayed right in the truck with him. I mean, wouldn't you? If you were already scared out of your wits, would you get out of the vehicle and stand by yourself? I don't believe so. Not with the situation you just seen.
But when they approached the area, they saw the thing leave.
So they once again witnessed the UFO as it left. Another key piece.
So Kenny said that he wasn't so worried that the thing was going to come back. His main concern was how horrible my body was going to look. Because they had this argument about whether it incinerated me or disintegrated me. And Kenny was thinking there'd be a charred corpse there. So they found where the truck had spun out when they took off and made a search around the perimeter of the clearing, John said. And they were calling and looking. And at one point, Mike broke down crying, fell to his knees. And, that was his one break, It just, the not finding my body where it landed and then feel all this guilt about, taking off, which is, totally understandable. It was something that just really affected him at that moment.
Now, could you imagine, after all that's done happened so far, you watched your buddy be hit by this energetic beam from a UFO nonetheless, and slung more than 20 feet, landing flat of his back like a rag doll, and now you can't find the body or any evidence of him after you've done left and come back, and you can't find where he should have been laying, and the UFO is taken off? I mean, yeah, I'd be freaking out just a little bit, not gonna lie.
So when they headed back to town, were they deciding what to do? They knew they had to get help. Alan, had some trouble with the law in the past, and he didn't want to go tell the authorities. He said, well, let's just get some friends with guns, and we'll come back, and then if we can't find Travis, then we can report it. But, some of the others said, look, if Travis is never found, how's that going to look if we don't report this? So they did decide to report it.
So after a bit of discussion, they decide to do what would be the right thing, right? Report that there's been an incident that has occurred. Well, you would think that was the right thing to do anyway. But it also helps in the fact that it's well documented now in the police files, too.
They went to a phone booth and called the sheriff, the sheriff's deputy, and he called the sheriff down. And when the sheriff and his men, his deputies, were interviewing the men there, they were so terrified, so upset, some of the guys were still crying, that, the sheriff had no doubt that something really serious had happened.
So at least the sheriff acknowledged that something bad had occurred, however.
But come to find out, their immediate suspicion was that they'd murdered me. Buried my body somewhere out there and made up the craziest, most unlikely cover story you could come up with.
So I can understand where the police are coming from. When the only tool you have is a hammer, everything must look like a nail. So to the cops, everything looks like a crime, right? And, I don't know if I'd come up with that cover story. I think that the logic behind that being what had happened, that they had murdered Travis, and the cover story was a UFO, I think they would have come up with a better cover story than that. I'm just saying the logic there is just as bad as the logic that they're trying to, quote, debunk. So, take all that as you will, but I guess human nature dictates a little bit of oddity there, right? But yeah, again, I see where the police are coming from, but if they just told you everything that's happened and the evidence is backing up what's happened, I mean, it's, I don't know. I can see where the police would think it's a murder, but it kind of makes me mad that that's the first thing they go to. You know what I mean?
So, the sheriff was checking the back of the truck to see if there were beer cans in there. And he said, when people ask him, he says, I looked and I didn't spot anything, and I was looking. So they went out there and made a search that night, and half of the crew and the other half went back to town. But they mounted a massive manhunt. They got volunteers out there the next morning, 60 men on horseback, on four-wheel drives, on foot. They would space everyone equally across a huge area where each searcher was in sight of the other, and they made these grid-like sweeps through there. They had helicopters and airplanes. They even brought in the tracking dogs from the prison, and the dogs were unable to find a trail other than up to where my body fell.
And there's so many oddities here. It's amazing to me that the dogs lose a trail right in the last spot that he was seen and no longer could be found. And he was missing for 5 days. And of course, everybody thought that co-workers had murdered him, That's what everybody pretty much had got in their head. And we know how the mob mentality is. We see in our world every day. It was no different then either. And they walked around for 5 days wondering what in God's name happened to Travis. He just absolutely disappeared, and nobody can explain it.
The sheriff brought in the state police lie detector expert. He was the top guy in the state, probably one of the top in the nation. And fully expecting to find that the men had murdered me, they passed.
And thank God that they were wrong and he wasn't actually murdered, as we know, because we're now hearing from him, right? But yeah, could you imagine, right? Could you imagine being one of those friends now after you've done watched this whole ordeal and everyone thinks you murdered your friend or your brother or, whoever it may be? Could you imagine being in that situation? That would be horrible. But what was Travis going through? We know there were searches going on down here on the ground and all kind of stuff between people being accused of murder and everything else. But what was Travis himself experiencing while he was missing from the earth? Well, we will get into all of that in the second half of the Dark Wolf's Den Show, ladies and gentlemen. We got to go ahead and take a network break right here, and we will be back with the second half and more with the Travis Walton story, the true story of Fire in the Sky, right after these messages. Don't you touch that dial. That's right.
We gotta stoke the fires and run off the men in black. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
Oh yes, the Travis Walton case. Thank you so much, Jerry, for bringing it up to date in 2021. Hi everyone, it's AJ, the Ripon Rabbit. Are you enjoying tonight's look at the Travis Walton case? I know I am. If you haven't done so already, please thumb up that video, hit that subscribe button, and ring that bell. Supposedly, you'll get our notifications every time we go live. Now, somebody told me last week they got 6 notifications that we were live. I don't know what. Weird things happening abound YouTube these days. But if you haven't done so already, please make sure to review your subscribe settings. If you don't know, we're here every Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights, bringing you the very best at Common Sense Radio, the Ripon Rabbit Hole. I'll be back again tomorrow night, Friday, February 19th, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Come along with me as we dive down the rabbit hole and look at get-rich-quick schemes. That's right, we're going to take a look at ways that you can get rich quick. What works and what doesn't? What is a scam? We're going to find out tomorrow night. Join me as the rabbit hole continues. Then Saturday, February 20th, let's journey on a field trip to Stonehenge. Explore the rabbit hole and the mysteries of Stonehenge together with me. Saturday, February 20th, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Then we'll end out the weekend right together Sunday with Secrets to Know. Huh? How do you say no? What are the secrets to saying, not gonna do it, wouldn't be prudent? Ways to clearly identify when it's important to say no and just how to do it. That'll end out the weekend right. Sunday, February 21st, 2021, right here on the very best of Common Sense Radio, the Ripon Rabbit Hole. If you haven't done so already, please hop on over to our website. That's RIPONRABBITHOLE.com, RiponRabbitHole.com. There you can sign up for your Backstage Pass. It's absolutely free to do so. It's going to unlock a bunch of really cool bonus features like Down the Rabbit Hole social media network, which will allow you to engage and participate in a wide variety of several different rabbit hole groups down the rabbit hole, where the conversation continues after the show at the RiponRabbitHole.com. We'll return you back to tonight, Jerry Hicks and the Dark Wolf's Den Show, as he continues to howl at the very serious Travis Walton case. You're listening to Ripon Common Sense Radio, the Ripon Rabbit Hole.
This is My Life DIY, and
Hi, this is JoJo.
Hi, my name is Oz.
Hey everybody, it's AJ the Ripon Rabbit.
This is Cynthia Sue Larson.
This is your man Meta, aka Propagate This Light.
And you're now listening
to Dark Wolf's Den.
The Dark Wolf's Den Show on Ripon Common Sense Radio.
If you were meant to be controlled, you would have come with a remote, but you didn't. And that's why you listen to the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf. And welcome back to the second half of the Dark Wolf's Den Show for Thursday, February 18th, 2021. So whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we are discussing Fire in the Sky, the true story of the Travis Walton case. And so far, we've heard the original scenario where they've spotted the UFO right after work and they chased it down, and Travis had a event where they was struck by an energy source and slung to the ground, and then there was all kind of search and rescue, and nobody could figure out what was happening. And after reporting it to the sheriff and doing the right thing, of course, you know, they were all looked at under suspicion of murder because nobody could find Travis or find his body. It's really things getting kind of rough down here. But what was Travis experiencing after he disappeared? What kind of memories does he have of what he experienced? Well, this is where things get really crazy. And again, this is one of my favorite cases because it is one of the most well documented cases. You've got all of the police reports from the lie detector tests all the way to the search and rescues and the story that they originally got. You know, as wild as the story sounded, of course they think something else is going on, but they're about to learn a huge lesson by the time we get to the end of this. That said, what was Travis experiencing? Did he really get abducted into the UFO afterwards? And if so, what happened? Well, let's hear it from the man himself. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor and pleasure once again to reintroduce Mr. Travis Walton.
When I woke up, I was lying on my back. I was in a lot of pain. a lot of pain. I felt something was seriously wrong. Mortally wounded is how it felt. There was a huge pain in my head and chest, and I was having a lot of trouble breathing. But I just kind of faded into consciousness. It wasn't like I just woke up. First, I didn't even know where I was. I was lying on my back, and there was this thing across my chest, and if I moved in the slightest, it made it even more painful. Then I remembered that we'd seen this object in the woods, and I thought maybe I'd been hurt and the crew had taken me to the hospital.
And so far, that is logical, right? That's probably what we would all think, just kind of fading into consciousness in the situation there.
But I heard the sounds of movement around me, and there was a light above me, and that hurt to look at, even though it wasn't even as bright as that. It was not that bright, but I had double vision, and it was real blurry. So when I saw these faces, I thought it was doctors with a surgical mask and cap, with just this part open.
Which, again, makes absolutely logical sense, right?
But when my vision cleared, then I could see these creatures standing there. And I just flipped out at that point. I just really lost my mind with fear. And some people don't understand that. They think, well, I wouldn't be that scared. I would just stay calm. Ask good questions. Pick up a souvenir, put it in my pocket.
So if it had been a more regular abduction scenario, like if I was wide awake, maybe I would agree with what he said there. But I mean, given the situation, you've just experienced something pretty traumatic anyway. And now you're looking at these aliens and you just woke up into this weird situation. Yeah, I think I'd probably be freaking out at that point because the logic no longer works for what logic is, what we know, here on Earth. So yeah, I think I'd probably be freaking out just a little bit, in the situation that he was in at the time. As much as I'd like to think I would be a calm, cool-headed dude, if I was in that particular scenario, I'd probably flip out a little bit. What about you guys? Would you flip out if you woke up from a scenario like that where you just been, seen the UFO in the woods and were slung onto your back and all that, and then you wake up with this thing in your chest and these creatures around you? Oh, yeah. What would you guys do? Would you be freaking out, or would you be calm, cool, and collected and, asking questions, hey, how's it going? What do you think?
But I try to explain this level of fear that I was experiencing by comparing it to being waterboarding. The one factor above all was that feeling of suffocation. And even though, terrorists are aware of this technique, they even practice resisting it, it still works. Our guys practice it. They know it's not fatal, and they know they're going to survive it, but the feeling of suffocation generates fear that you just can't reason away. There's a scene in the movie where the actor's held down on a table, the aliens are surrounding him, and they have this membrane over his face, and he's struggling to scream, struggling to breathe through it. And I think that does a better job of explaining that level of suffocation, that smothering feeling, than if you just showed the actor looking panicked and breathing hard. It's that added to the feeling of pain, the feeling that something was mortally wrong inside, and this dimly lit, claustrophobic, humid atmosphere, all being confronted with these creatures that definitely not human. And so the perception that I was in the most life-threatening situation, being attacked by monsters that were causing this pain, was what generated this panic that just wouldn't go away.
So to reiterate, in the movie, when you see the membrane over the actor, that wasn't necessarily in place, in the experience. However, it does show the amount and level of suffocation that the actor was feeling. So keep that in mind. That's more of a symbolic piece in the movie. Whereas, it just shows that the inability to really move and breathe and the panic that was felt in the scenario. So the membrane wasn't really there there in the actual experience, according to Travis?
So I tried to move, and I was so weak. I don't know whether I was weakened by the lack of oxygen, or by the results, the effects of my injury, or maybe the gravity was actually heavier in there. But it felt like, that added to the panic. The need to move and move quickly, and not being able to. The feeling you're dragging back when you need to move fast.
And if the theories are right about a gravitational field that surrounds only the craft itself, then that would make sense that the gravitational difference could be actually calculated and created in a artificial gravitational field. It could be made to the point where humans would have to move slower just due to the gravity and mass weight scenarios and all the physics involved with that.
The one that was closest to me, its face was close by, and I tried to move my arm to strike at him, but it was just more of a push than anything. And it fell back into the other one, and I rolled away, and that thing they had across my chest fell off. But I was mainly just focused on them, and they're coming around the table towards me.
Now, I will say, in what I've heard so far, it does seem like the aliens most likely, after realizing that this thing had discharged, did go ahead and abduct him and try to fix whatever the issue had been caused. It seems like more of a medical try to save his life, because he even said it felt like a mortal wounding inside, right? It seems to me more like the aliens were trying to save his life than experiment or guinea pig or anything like that on him. But of course, the human is not going to understand that scenario. It reminds me of the same situation as a animal that's injured, and the human is trying to help it, but the animal doesn't realize that, and the animal is freaking out and scared and doing everything to defend itself, because that's what's natural to it, even though the human is trying to help. And this could be the same scenario here. The aliens are trying to help, but of course the human is freaking out because, what in the world is this? It's probably bad. It's an instinctual fight or flight, fight back instinct, right? So even though it could have been for a good intent at the time, Travis doesn't know that, and who would, right? What would logically make sense to make one think that in the moment, right? So yeah, this is getting really, really interesting, but there's a piece coming up that really intrigues me here in just a moment.
So I stumbled back and I bumped up against a shelf, and I looked back there and I could see some instruments laid out there. And I didn't stand there and muse about what they were for or anything like that. I just grabbed the biggest thing I could find and started swinging it and tried to make a weapon out of it and to keep them away from me. They were not within striking distance, but they stopped short of that. And they sort of had their hands extended, but the most memorable thing was this stare. The three of them staring at me in a most, it was the most disturbing part of the entire experience. The memory of that stare, the three of them, and they would blink occasionally, but they never took their eyes off of me, and it gave me this sort of a squirmy feeling in my head that felt very invasive, intrusive. And after I was returned, one of the medical tests that I underwent was a EEG, brainwave scan. And because of the intense media scrutiny, I was put in there under an assumed name. This is world famous brain trauma center, Barrows Neurological. And so the technician knew nothing about, he was just told to look for injury. And there was a wave pattern that was in the report that backs up the idea that perhaps they were trying to assert some kind of mind control.
And of course, we know in almost every single abduction case scenario, there's this report of the aliens having telepathic communication abilities, and even up to an ability to almost control the human or the thoughts of the human, right? To be able to keep the human calm or have some type of mental manipulation over them. And in Travis's case, for some odd reason, that just didn't work.
Sort of a subduing sort of an effect, or maybe just to communicate, their intentions. But it wasn't working because of this damage from this blast of energy.
And that is a speculation, let's be clear, but it very well could be the reason that it didn't work. It could be. We don't know that for sure. But for whatever reason, the usual thing they're able to do to every human, their mental manipulation abilities, for whatever reason, just did not physically work on Travis. And I find that extremely intriguing about this case.
They abruptly turned and left. I think now, in retrospect, that probably they were just giving up and realizing that, at that point, even in my impaired state, that I was more of a threat to them physically, without that power to control me and to keep me knocked out on the table, that wasn't going to work. There's a plan to have the original EEG examined by a neuroscientist in terms of the effects that you see in people who've been electrocuted or hit by lightning, and also to run new ones and see if any of these patterns are still there.
And I do apologize. Unfortunately, I don't have the data if the tests have been rerun, and if there is new updated information, I don't have that data in hand at the moment. If I do run across it in future episodes, I will bring it back up. But yeah, my apologies. I don't have that if it is available at the moment. If you guys know where it is, go ahead and let me know. I'd love to see any updates on this case. I've been following it for many, many years as a researcher, of course.
But I was just immediately, in a frenzy to escape. And so when they went out and went down to the right, I went down to the left. And there was this real cramped, dimly lit passage that was curving so tightly that I couldn't tell if they were pursuing me. They could be right behind me, and I wouldn't know.
Now, I wrote a book a while back. It hasn't been published yet, but one part of my book, the humans escape onto a UFO and are running around a UFO without the aliens' knowledge or the aliens' ability to stop them. If I ever get the book published, I'll let you guys know. But this is the exact same scenarios in my book, interestingly enough. Probably where I got these ideas subconsciously from. But Travis is now wandering around an alien UFO, right? Without the ability of the aliens to control his thoughts and his actions. Little bit dangerous for the aliens at this point.
And was I running into something worse ahead? But I got up there and I found an opening into a room. And I saw what were doorways on the opposite side. Now I pieced together this layout later. But because I wasn't thinking very clearly or didn't really know the whereabouts of the whole thing, I was thinking that if I opened one of these doors that maybe I could just drop to the ground, I'd be back in the woods, which is probably not the case at all. It was probably not in the woods anymore, and it certainly wouldn't have led out of the craft. And
I gotta admit, though, I do love his logic here, right? Looking for an exit door, right? I doubt it's gonna be brilliantly lit with red letters. What do you think? Exit here, right?
Could have been in some place without air, but I was trying to open a door. Not thinking clearly, just total frenzy, hysteria. And when I moved into this room to inspect the doorways to find a way to open them, there was the effect of being able to see the stars surrounding me. The points of light, whether this was a planetarium, just a map room, or an actual view of where it was at. The closer I got to the chair in the middle of the room, the more visible these stars were.
Now, for a ufology researcher, you're talking about a tour inside a UFO is what he's describing right now. This is absolutely insider information if ever was, right? If you take it for face value, if you take it as just a eyewitness explaining what they're experiencing, this is absolutely incredible from a ufologist standpoint, right? But it gets even better.
But I was not finding any doorknobs or buttons to open the doors. I thought desperately, just push some of these controls on the chair, maybe that would open a door.
And of course, when it comes to human mechanics, if you push enough buttons, you're bound to make something happen, right?
And so I was trying all kinds of things. Didn't have touch screen at the time, so I never touched the screen. And it was glowing soft green with black lines that moved sometimes. Some of the buttons didn't seem to do anything.
And he never goes into explanations of the characters that showed up in these black lines, but I'd be willing to bet that they're characters that appear on the Roswell information, as well as other hieroglyphic-style characters that have been reported by other people in UFO contactee abduction scenarios.
But there were no characters, no little numbers or letters or anything like that, at least that I could see. Some people think, well, maybe it was there in infrared or ultraviolet or something. But what was really alarming was when I moved that lever, the entire star pattern shifted, and I was already really unsteady on my feet, and that was very disorienting. So I resolved not to mess with that anymore. But
so that intrigues me. He pulled a lever and the whole star pattern shifted. And that could be interpreted a number of ways, whether his placement on the craft moved, or whether the craft itself suddenly moved, or whether it even phased in or out of a different dimensional sort. Like, that's all speculation and interpretation, but the fact that it suddenly changed, the star pattern changed when he pulled a lever in an alien craft, that's very, very intriguing piece of information. And now, mind you, you've got a human hitting buttons and pulling levers on your spacecraft, and you can't control him. So what are you going to do?
Just thinking of pushing another button, my attention was caught by either a sound or a change in light from the door that I'd come into. And I turned and I saw a man standing in the doorway. And I just took it to be somebody that was there to take me away from these monsters, you know. And so as he came towards me, I ran up and was just babbling questions, telling him, you know, there's these things in here, you know, and as if he didn't know. But he wasn't answering and wasn't responding. And so when he wanted me to go with him, I went, because, you know, if he's there to save me from these things, that's all great. And I was thinking that maybe with that helmet on, he couldn't talk or hear me clearly. So going back to this, we went out through this little passage I think was probably an airlock.
So it seems to me the aliens regrouped and come up with a new plan to use a human in order to manipulate Travis into following them, right? The helmet on the head, right? The non-responsiveness of the human. It was either a clone, which is a possibility, of course, or a human under mind control that didn't have the issues that Travis had being held under mind control, right? But this is really interesting, and it only gets better. Check this out.
Because when we came out on the other side, it was opening up into this huge room. It's so bright that it just hurt my eyes because it was so dim inside there. But much cooler, much more fresh air. He wanted me to go down this ramp, which seemed way too steep, but it was real sure gripping surface of some kind of rubbery. But the light seemed kind of like sunlight. So I don't know whether these were windows, translucent windows, or if they were some kind of an artificial fixture that put off something close to sunlight. But I tried to look around But he seemed to be in a pretty big hurry. He was pulling me along even though I was half stumbling. And I saw these other craft in there, these more rounded saucers, much shinier. And he took me through, see, this room was shaped like a quarter of a cylinder. So it gave me the impression of an airplane hangar, like, you know, a big half round, but it could have been like a larger craft, like a mothership, you'd call them.
So if you're inside a circular craft, that's what I would expect the wall of a circular craft to look like if you're at the edge of it, is a half round, right? The edge of the circle.
So whether it was on Earth or who knows where, under the water, anywhere, you know, I don't know where this was. So he took me out through the vertical wall, down a hallway to a room, and there were some other people dressed like him, except for one thing. They didn't have the helmets on. So I thought, you know, maybe here's somebody who can answer my question. So they weren't answering the questions either. And so they're trying to lead me over and get me to lay down on this table. And, you know, I was really became suspicious at that point. Was this a rescue? You know, thinking that these were, you know, some military or NASA or something. And so I started to fight them. But I was in a really weakened condition. I was in great shape at the time, but I could hardly move. I was so impaired. They pushed me down on the table fairly easily, but in my panic, I was able to get one hand free, and I got my hand underneath the edge of this oxygen mask they put over my face. But before I could pull it away, I just went out. And it wasn't painful or anything. Everything just went black.
So there's no telling how much time had passed now between the moment that the oxygen mask goes on and the next event that occurred.
So when I woke up, I was lying face down. My head was on my arm. I could feel the cold of the ground, and my clothing still had warmth in it. But it was cold outside, and there was a light above me, so I looked to see where the light was coming from. That's when I saw that the light went off. And all I could see in the dark was this real shiny hull reflecting the highway, and then it just shot straight up. It didn't turn on edge, and it was silent. It just went straight up. And it just seemed like, you know, it'd be like a rifle shot or, you know, scream through the air and to move that fast, but it didn't. Now, maybe the fact that it wasn't lit made it seem to disappear from sight faster, but my immediate reaction was this feeling in contrast to that hysteria and fear, that feeling of being trapped. You know, even at night, the woods are a much friendlier place to you know, someone who's worked in the out of doors all this time. So there was this feeling of relief, but the fear of what I experienced was the main memory that was dominating my thoughts. I looked down the hill and I could see the lights that I recognized as Heber, the town nearest where this happened. So I ran down towards the town, and there was a building with some lights on, and smoke coming out of the chimney, and I pounded and yelled, and nobody came. Either because nobody heard me, or nobody was there, or maybe who's this crazy person screaming in the middle of the night? You know, they don't want to come out. But nobody came out, so I went on down. I was afraid to go into the side street, so I went right on down across the second bridge and found a row of phone booths at the gas station there. Went into the first one. It was out of order. So, you know, I was on my last leg. I was, you know, that burst of energy that got me there was gone. I went into the middle one, and it worked. Now, people wonder, did I have a quarter in my pocket? In that part of the country at that time, all you did was pick up the receiver and hit 0, and you could talk to the operator. So I made a collect call to my brother-in-law, Grant, and he thought it was another prank call. The family had been having all kinds of crank calls. And so he real sarcastic like said, I think you have the wrong number. He didn't believe it was me. But I screamed, and I managed to convince him it's me, Travis, you know. So he said, okay, I'll get your brother and come and get you.
Could you imagine now? They've been accused for 5 days of murder and everything else. Nobody can find Travis. Nobody's heard from Travis. Then all of a sudden, you get a phone call, and it's Travis.
So I was thinking when I hung up, you know, my brother, you know, he doesn't live here. And I just slumped down in the phone booth there. That's where they found me. But I was talking to a radio host in the Great Lakes region, and he pointed out that at the time that I was making that call to my brother-in-law, Grant, there was the exact moment of the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And the radio host told me that they'd actually scrambled jets because of UFO sightings near where that shipwreck happened on the Great Lakes. And 29 people disappeared that night. And one of the crewmen was named Grant Walton. So that's, you know, one of a lot of really amazing coincidences in connection with this incident.
And the synchronicities abound.
Next thing I knew, my brother, you know, and brother-in-law pulled up in the truck, and he came and opened the booth and picked me up out of there, and I was just a wreck, you know. I couldn't finish a sentence, and it was that way for days. I was just trying to tell him what happened, but he said something about how worried my mother had been all these days, and I said, days, you know. And he said, Travis, feel your face, because it was apparent to him that I thought this was still the same night. And I felt a 5-day growth of beard, and then I looked at my watch, and the date had changed, and I was just, you know, I just kind of went catatonic at that point. I was in such horrible shape. My brother said, there ain't no way I'm letting that crazy mom get a hold of this guy. Because, you know, unbeknownst to me, you know, by the time I was returned, this was already worldwide news. They had camera crews from England and Japan, and, you know, photographers walking through my mother's flower beds and trying to take pictures through the window. Steve said even at his place there in Taylor, you know, they were trying to take pictures through his bedroom window. And so it was just crazy, you know. John said he'd be walking down the street and people would scream, where'd you hide the body? And it was a madhouse. And plus, some of the crank calls or calls that the family had been getting included one from this lady who said she was a nurse and she was working at a hospital where a couple came in who had a UFO encounter. And when she came back on shift, this old couple was gone, their records were gone, and people were saying, that never happened. So she was saying, just be careful who gets a hold of him, should he ever be found. And another guy called that said he was retired CIA. He sounded totally sane, unlike some of the calls. And he left his contact information. But he said, just be careful who you hand him over to.
And in those days, the secrecy was full force, and you didn't question or talk about something that the government has told you didn't talk about, right? And they wanted to ensure UFO secrecy remained, so there were certain groups inside the government that you did not want the person to get involved with, or you may no longer hear the story ever again, or even hear from them ever again. It used to be that dangerous. Now it's a little less dangerous when it comes to UFOs and more dangerous when it comes to other things. But yeah, there was a major taboo of that in the time of this occurrence. And the police now, remember, the police aren't exactly the most trusted to hear by the family either, because they've been accusing them all week of murder, right?
The Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, this here is Jim Lorenzen. That time it was the oldest and largest MUFON type organization. And they had 2 real doctors in their Phoenix membership who came to the house, did a house call, an examination immediately, and then signed off on a bunch of tests, among which was blood and urine samples that were put through the Maricopa County Medical Examiner's drug screen, which proved there was no trace of any drugs in my body.
There's been a lot of rumors over the years that it was just a drug-induced hallucination, but the actual medical test after the event prove there was no drug use involved in the experience. This is very, very important. And again, this is one of the most well-documented cases ever because there's medical evidence, there's police reports, there's all kinds of things that happened in the 5 days that Travis was gone. Everybody told the same story at the beginning, and then you have Travis show up with an even wilder story, yet he is alive. So their hypothesis was wrong to begin with, and now there's medical batteries of tests, right?
But another theory that was offered to try to explain it away was that the hypnotist, Dr. James Harder, had planted these memories in my mind. Another theory was that I had a transitory psychosis, that I temporarily became insane, hallucinated this experience, and then returned to normal. Well, I had a whole battery of psychiatric tests that were reviewed by Dr. Leo Sprinkle, counseling and testing at the University of Wyoming, which proved to be a total normal pattern of scores. But these three theories did not take into account that 6 other people saw what I did. So, how would one man's drug hallucination make 7 people see the exact same thing? And the news media never stopped to question that. It's like if we can explain it away any way we can get it, no matter how flimsy it is, it's the planet Jupiter. This is not at all what we saw. Then people just glom onto it and say, oh yeah, and in many, many cases, you'll see this in the media where, they'll explain something away. It doesn't make any sense at all. But if you want to believe what they're saying, it doesn't have to really stand up to much scrutiny.
If you want to believe what the popular narrative is, then it doesn't have to stand out to much scrutiny, does it? However, if you question the popular narrative, it better stand up to all kinds of scrutiny. In this case, definitely does just that.
I was interviewed by Dr. J. Allen Hynek. He was in charge of Project Blue Book for the Air Force concerning UFOs, one of the major landmark studies commissioned. And even though he was famous for coining the term swamp gas in connection with UFOs, he issued a press release the next day that I was not hoaxing. It had been the subject of many unfounded accusations. But at the time that the crew passed the polygraph test, the president of the American Polygraph Association made a statement which was pretty unequivocal.
Now remember, all of the crew have done passed the polygraph test given them in question of whether they did something to Travis or whether their story was really true or whether they'd really seen and experienced the UFO situation, the whole 9 yards. Every one of them, remember, every last one of the crew passed. We heard that earlier, as well as Travis passing. So what does the president of the company say about that? The president are the ones that give the lie detectors. What did he say about the chance ability for that to happen?
He said that when you have, upper 90 percentiles of reliability of polygraph with a single test, when you have 6 people passing tests on the same issue, the odds are over 1,000,000 to 1 of there being any error in the testing.
1,000,000 to 1 that the odds of testing and error could be possible across all these past tests. That's interesting.
And as of now, there's been 16 or 17 past tests in connection with this incident. Some of the crewmen passing 2 or 3 tests each. I've passed 5 different lie detector tests from 3 different examiners, all of whom had many years of law enforcement experience, which is supposed to be the gold standard for polygraph training. But in the aftermath of my experience...
So if you want to accept the polygraph as the gold standard for the lie detector test, and if you want to try to trip these guys up and give them multiple tests and everything else, they've passed with flying colors from the top of the top-level experts giving these tests. So they haven't been able to trip them up at all. I find that incredibly intriguing and really good evidence that this is a true experience of what happened. I don't find any reason not to believe it personally, even as wild and far-fetched as it may sound. But there's another interesting coincidence with this. Check this out.
I got a topographical map of the state of Arizona, and to look at where the incident happened. And just a coincidence was, of these 70-some areas, the area where the incident happened was labeled Area 51.
Of all the locations on the map markers that he could have been, is Area 51 of the Arizona map. How interesting is that?
We went back to the site to do some filming for a show for the promotion of the movie when it was coming out. And there was 3 feet of snow out there, but boy, Paramount wanted that interview on the site. So they rented these big snowcats with big 4-foot wide tracks on them, and we went plowing through the snowdrifts, found the spot finally with some difficulty, did the interview with icicles in my mustache. And Mike was there. He was being interviewed, the crew boss, and he never said a word to me, but he figured out why we had such trouble finding the spot. The trees were much bigger than he thought they would be. And, the following spring, he went out there and did this core sample and discovered that this tree nearest where the craft had come down had suddenly started growing to where the tree was twice the diameter it would have been in that much time. You see, you can see that from the 1918, when the tree first started growing, up to the time of the incident, the tree was 85 years old. And in the next 15 years, it's doubled in diameter. And since the outside of the tree contains much more volume than the inside, the calculation for the volume of a tall cone, it's not really a cylinder, it tapers to a point. So the formula is that approximately 36 times the amount of wood fiber was being produced by these trees.
And if you guys have heard me tell my UFO story, when I encountered the grass in the field in which the encounter occurred was grown up much higher than it should have been where I seen the object. So it was interesting that, that the fibers in the structure of the grass was actually more than it should have been. And you have this case here in the Travis Walton case where you have the same thing. The tree suddenly created more fiber than it should have. It grew bigger and taller than it should have. So this was an interesting, or at least lighter around, right? This is an interesting piece of the case file here because, like I said, I experienced the same thing in a personal case file that I had a part of.
There's been quite a bit of follow-up research on that. But here recently, we discovered something else. This core sample just coincidentally was on the side of the tree towards where the craft had hovered. Well, since the incident, there was a forest fire that came through there and killed a lot of the trees. So we were able to cut the tree completely off. See, we didn't want to damage the tree. And what Mike did was take the core sample and then put another piece of wood in that fit closely and seal it back up so the tree wouldn't die from it. Well, now that they were already dead, we cut the tree off and then found out that this effect was on the side of the tree in the direction that the craft had been. So whether it was north, south, east, or west, the high growth rate side was towards the craft. So it definitely shows, to all the theories about it being the north wind or the southern exposure from the sun or any of those kind of effects, that this was a directional effect.
Which, once again, matches my experience 100%. But what do you guys think? Do you think the Travis Walton case is an actual abductee experience and possibly one of the best UFO abduction experience cases that we have on file due to the amount of evidence collected both medically and by law enforcement and the many different documents that have backed this up, as well as the lie detectors and the stories from the eyewitnesses, including Travis Case himself. If you've seen the movie, again, that is a dramatization, but a pretty close dramatization of what occurred. And in the end, it's going to be up to you guys. I know I believe it. It's one of the craziest cases I've run across and one of the most amazing cases that I run across. And no matter how much common sense I apply to it, I can't help but believe that something occurred in the woods to these guys. But in the end, ladies and gentlemen, it's up to you. In the end, all you can do is look at the evidence, hear the case file out, and in the end, apply a little common sense, and you be the judge. We got to close it out. That's right, that's it for this episode of the Dark Wolf's Den Show for Thursday, February 18th, 2021. So whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Ladies and gentlemen, the den may be closing, but don't you worry, the weekend fun is only just begun. That's right. Tomorrow night, Friday, February 19th, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. The other animal of radio, Mr. AJ the Ripon Rabbit, will take back to the airwaves for an all-new episode of the Ripon Rabbit Hole live show. That's right. Last week on Friday, there were some technical difficulties, and he wasn't able to present the Get Rich Quick episode, so we're going to try to run that again tomorrow night. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you do enjoy the discussion that AJ has planned as he goes through the different schemes that are out there for getting rich quick and the ones that we need to avoid and the things we need to know. That's right. Then on Saturday night, February 20th, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, AJ will be back to talk about Stonehenge. That's right. This is a subject that needs no introduction, and I can't wait to hear what he's got to say about that. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to be Saturday, February 20th, 2021. Then on Sunday, February 21st, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. One more time, AJ the Ripon Rabbit will be back with one more episode of the Ripon Rabbit Hole live show. That's right. He'll be closing out the weekend and rounding it out right with the secrets to know. What secrets to know? The secrets to saying no is what we need to know, right? We need to know how to say no when we need to say no, right? And need to know when to say no when we know it's no that we need to know, right? So, all right, if I've confused you enough, I do apologize, and maybe you can sort it out a little bit better on Sunday, February 21st, 2021, when AJ covers the secrets to saying no. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, an episode you definitely do not want to miss, and do not say no to that. That's right. Ladies and gentlemen, another thing I don't say no to is every chance that I get to go over to the RiponRabbitHole.com. That is RIPON RABBITHOLE.com. That's right. Over there, you're going to find a plethora of fun. First thing you want to do is sign up for our mail list. If you're not on the mail list already, you are missing out. Once a week, every week on Wednesday, you will receive an email with all of our schedule in the email. That's right. We send out one a week. We only send the one email. We do not sell your information, and we do not spam your inbox. That's right. So make sure you sign up for that. And then while you're signing up, make sure you sign up for our Backstage Pass to unlock all of the magic of the RiponRabbitHole.com. That's right. Like the ability to go down the rabbit hole where the conversation continues 24/7. That is our version of a social media alternative exclusive to the RiponRabbitHole.com. That's right. And then, ladies and gentlemen, while you're over there, make sure you drop in our 24/7 Backstage Lounge. Come on back and say hi to myself and the rest of the team that will be back there the rest of the evening conversing about various topics. That's right, we hope to see you along for the ride. Speaking of being along for the ride, we appreciate everybody who's been along for the ride with us this time we've been doing this show. We're up to episode 62, it looks like now, and I couldn't be more proud to have the ability to do this for you guys. So everyone listening in Ripon, Wisconsin, and all 49 other countries across the globe, we very much appreciate you guys tuning in to us here at Ripon Common Sense Radio. That's right. And on behalf of Chick Mandela Effect, Michael Musco, Walt House, AJ the Ripon Rabbit, that's right, everybody at Ripon Common Sense Radio, my name is Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf. And remember, until next time, ladies and gentlemen, stay awake, but dare to dream. That's right. Good night, everybody. How? Yeah. That's right.
Unlocked and into the dark. Some things are better left unknown. And I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. Oh, what a sinner, is it in her? What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner, is it in her? Is this real? Just illusion? I'm lost in wonderland of confusion. I'm lost in wonderland of confusion. Is this real or just illusion? Manifestation or a dark delusion? Is this real or just illusion? I'm lost in a wonderland of confusion.